Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be the next in my series of videos looking at the Eagles position by position. Earlier this weekend, I did defensive line. Now I'm going to be doing the linebackers. I also have done one on the quarterbacks and running backs. I did one on wide receivers and tight ends and one on the offensive line. And then next week, I'll be doing one on the defensive secondary. If you want, I'll be putting a link up in the corner there that you can click on if you want to view the playlist. It's going to have all of these in them, so you can watch those if you want to get caught up if there's one that you've missed. But today, let's go ahead and take a look at the Eagles linebackers.
We'll go ahead and start out with Jordan Hicks, who I contend was probably one of the best linebackers we had over the last, certainly last season. And even going back to his rookie season, the first half of that rookie season, he was fantastic. I thought he was a Defensive Rookie of the Year candidate going into the second half of that season. Unfortunately, injury cut that short, and we didn't really get to see what would end up happening with that. But Jordan Hicks has been an absolute steal for us and has been a great player. He's still in his rookie contract, so his cap hit is absolutely minimal. But he's a fantastic player. The real problem you're going to have with Jordan Hicks is down the road. He's probably going to command a lot of money looking ahead. So in a year or two, he could get real expensive for us to keep. But for now, he's an absolute steal for what he is, and he's been a fantastic player. And I think, like I said, he's clearly the best linebacker on the team. And I think at this point, he's really become one of the leaders on that defense. Clearly the leader as it relates to the front seven. And for those reasons, I think the Eagles are lucky to have him. And it'll be a pleasure just to see what continues to happen as his career moves forward. The next easy guy to talk about is Nigel Bradham. In terms of both his contract and his play, I thought he was a really good linebacker for us as well this season. He costs $4.25 million against the cap this year. They could save some money if they cut him, but I don't know why you would. He certainly, like I said, was a solid player for us this year. Really fit right back into Jim Schwartz's defense where he had played in Buffalo before. So he's a real steal. He's actually an interesting situation because he's only got one more year left on his deal. And really, if the Eagles wanted to free up some cap space for this coming season, one of the easiest ways they could do that is actually in extending Nigel Bradham, because what they could do is make his cap number for this coming season a lot lower if they extended him. So if he does get extended here early in the offseason, I think that's probably going to be one of the main reasons why, is they're going to want to free up some cap space. And by renegotiating his contract and putting less in this next year, it would be an easy way for them to free up some money. And it would obviously, lock down a player who was pretty important for us as a linebacker this past season. And that brings us to a guy who's a little more problematic, and that's Michael Kendricks. Michael Kendricks looked great for us the first year or two we had him, but has really dropped off lately. And this coming year, he's a $6.6 million cap hit, which is a real problem. The problem you have is if you cut him, he would cost you $4.8 million against the cap this coming year. So cutting him only saves you $1.8 million, and to sign someone to basically replace him would once again probably be about the same amount of money. So you really get nothing by going ahead and cutting him, which I think is one of the main reasons why you've seen a lot of talks with them in terms of maybe working out a trade, because that way at least you get something back. Even if it's a late round draft pick that you can draft another linebacker to sort of fill in some of the gaps. That's sort of the problem is if you do get rid of him, even if you trade him, you're still going to be responsible for that $4.8 million against the cap this coming year. But then you can get away with his replacement probably a little cheaper because you can use a draft pick as his replacement, knowing that you've gotten something back in return. So that's probably what I would look for if they were to trade him. They'd probably try and get at least some sort of late round draft pick, 5th, 6th, 7th round, something like that. And if they could do that, I think they probably absolutely should, because at this point, Kendricks just does not fit into this system. And maybe he just needs a change of scenery. I don't know, but he's clearly his level of play has dropped off the last few seasons, and he's one of the guys that I think that they probably need to move on from, regardless of the cap number at this point. And finally, that brings us to some of the reserves that the Eagles had for this past season. Grugier-Hill was one of the main guys that they had sort of as a backup linebacker, but his main area where he was used was on special teams. I thought he was great on special teams, and I would expect that the Eagles will bring him back in that capacity. He's relatively cheap in terms of his contract, only $540,000. So I would see no reason why they wouldn't bring him back on his current contract. Another guy that we don't have a picture of because he didn't play at all this past season because of an injury in training camp was Joe Walker. And he's a very small contract number at $480,000. Was a rookie last year. Really has nothing in terms of what he'll end up costing you to keep him. So I would expect that they'll bring him back to camp next year, see if he can make the team. The last guy who's under contract with the Eagles at linebacker is Don Cherry, and he was someone that was actually signed on a futures reserve contract. He was on the practice squad. So I don't see him being a major player in terms of what they're going to do. I think all these things add up to the fact, though, that they are sort of short at linebacker. There are two guys that we had this past season that are unrestricted free agents at linebacker. Stephen Tulloch was one of those. Who was an older guy they brought in after Joe Walker had the injury during training camp. He sort of acted as Jordan Hicks's backup in case Hicks got hurt again, and he really ended up sort of playing in that capacity. He was also familiar with Jim Schwartz's defense, but given his age and everything, I don't expect that he'll be back. The more interesting one is the guy pictured here, which is Najee Good. And he is an unrestricted free agent as well, was a big contributor on special teams, can also play a linebacker, sort of as a backup or as a rotation player. And if there's one unrestricted free agent that's on the Eagles team or was on the Eagles team that's now an unrestricted free agent that I'd really like them to bring back, it is Najee Good, just because he does bring a lot to you in special teams and he does provide some depth at linebacker, which I think they desperately need. Especially if you're not going to bring Michael Kendricks back, you need someone else that's going to be familiar with everything, that's going to be able to play. So I would like to see them bring Najee Good back, and we'll see what ends up happening with him long term. But that's an interesting name to sort of follow it and see exactly what happens.
So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the Eagles linebackers, and specifically, some of the ones that are easy decisions like the Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradhams of the world, and some that are a little more complicated like Michael Kendricks. What do you do with that contract and the like? Let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you think we should give Kendricks another shot and bring him back again? Do you think we just need to move on and don't worry about the cap and just go ahead and take the hit and cut him and not worry about it? And then what would you do with a guy like Najee Good? Would you bring him back and try and re-sign him, or do you think we're better off moving on? Let me know in the comments below what you think. Like I said, I'll be following up with the last in these series of videos looking at the defensive secondary next week. Until then, fly Eagles fly.